So today we are going to do a little bit of warping, kind of review some warping tools we learned early on, and introduce a couple new things, including nested smart objects. So we're going to start off with these two files. This labels week 6 file, which just has some generic labels to use. And we are going to also open up this structures W6, which as you can see has a bunch of layers with different structures, and this is all kind of just for exploring your design projects for home goods and that kind of thing. So we'll start off nice and easy. I'm gonna go to this Illustrator file, and I'm gonna choose this label here, and basically we're just warping all these labels onto the structures above them. So like this thank you label will warp onto this bag, this hand soap label will warp onto this pump bottle here, this all-purpose cleaner, so you can create die lines for yourself, and then warp your designs onto them in Photoshop fairly easily. Once you start getting really comfortable in Modo, it will probably be easier, or just more of a finished looking product, and it'll probably look better doing all your stuff in 3D mapping. But for your design phases, and when you're just trying to figure out where your structures are going to be, your phase 1 stuff, rather than rendering a new structure and trying to figure out how your design works on that, sometimes you just find structures online or in the market, take a picture of it, whatever it is, and you want to just be able to map your graphics onto it and just see how it looks, especially for presenting your phase 1 design concepts. So that's what this is mostly about today, and we're going to do that primarily in Photoshop, but I'll also show you some things in Illustrator, some warping things, mainly making with mesh objects. So we are gonna, again, I'm just gonna take this thank you label here from the labels week 6 file, and you can see I've just converted everything to outlines just to simplify it. But I'm gonna copy it, Command C, go to Photoshop, and again I'm doing this on the bag layer here, so I'm gonna Command V, paste it in here. Always I get this dialog box, smart object, and that's what I want. Anytime I'm taking anything from Illustrator, I like to keep it non-destructive editing, so keep it as smart object. I hit OK, and now I have it in here, and I can kind of just grab it and size it up just so it's closer to the bag size now. And normally when you have the transform tools open, you can do some of your warping, but when you copy a smart object into Photoshop and it's a vector smart object, you can't warp it certain ways. Basically, it gives you very confined warp tools. So basically, I'm just going to play around with this just to remind you what the warp tools are, but also to show you that, because this is a vector object, I can't necessarily warp it the way I want to warp it now. So if I just wanted to, do a kind of warp where it's like following this, angle of the bag here, again, Command T launches these warp tools. And if I click on any, one of these points, click on it and then hold down the Command key while I'm still clicking, I can warp it and distort it that way. But what you'll see is, because it's a vector smart object, if I go to do that from a corner, again, I'm going to click on this corner, and while I'm clicking, holding down my click, I hold down Command also, and then when I start moving it, you could see it just starts dragging like the whole edge of whichever direction I'm going in, rather than the corner, right? And that's because it is a vector smart object. Now, if I want to have a workaround for that, I'm going to do what is called a nested smart object. So, like I said, I'm just going to, make this a big enough size that we can work with so that it feels like it fits on this bag. And then I'm going to hit return or enter, and that will apply my transformation. Again, just that initial size up to fit on this bag. Now again, just to show you, if I launch my transform tools and try to pick the corner, it kind of just confines everything to, that one of those angles from the edges. But I don't want that. I want to be able to select each point and change all these angles to match accordingly. And you can see there's an angle on this bag here that's kind of different than the angle over here. This one's almost straight, and this one's kind of slanted a little bit to the left. So aforementioned nested smart objects. So I have my vector smart object, but if I right click or control click and make it a smart object again, so I'm converting this vector smart object basically into an image smart object or large document format. I will click on it, and it still says vector smart object, but what it actually did is it made this now an image smart object. So if I make it bigger than this, you'll see kind of like that distortion or pixelation. But what I can do is I can now grab these corners and operate them individually, just like I can when I'm using transform tools on any other image that is not a vector smart object. So that being said, I'm going to start warping this by, again, I'm going to click here. Really, I can click on any of these handles here, and after I click, hold down Command, and then I can move them. But I'm going to start by just doing the main angles first. So, I'm going to click on this angle here, and I'm going to hold down Command and then move it around. And I'm basically what I'm trying to do is align, this top edge similar to like the bag. It doesn't have to be perfect. I could just scooch this in a little bit. Use the other side to kind of just match that. Okay, so this top angle matches, and this angle is pretty good. But I'm going to work these bottom two corners now to get it even more, matching this bag so that it kind of really feels more natural on it. So again, I'm going to click and hold down my click, and then hold down Command and move it around while I'm holding down both. And you can see now I can match this outer edge of the bag a little bit better, a little bit more perfect. And I'm kind of matching this angle down here to here. Okay, and when, the way this always works is once you get to a point you like, again, I'm clicking and then holding down Command, then moving around with my click held down and Command held down. And then when I get to a point that I like, I'll release my mouse click, and it will, just stay in the last place that I moved it. So same thing. I'm rolling over this corner. I'm going to click, hold down Command, and then I can, again, match this edge closer to the bag here. So again, this matches pretty well, this matches pretty well, and this matches pretty well down here. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially when it's on a bag like this, and it kind of like all these things are at a weird perspective anyway. It's kind of got this twist going. And then you can just like transform, depending on the version of Photoshop you're working in. You can either just click and drag this up, or you have to hold shift and drag it, click and hold shift and drag it up. So it just, nudges it up a little bit. And then, once you have something you're happy with, like this angle, you could just hit enter or return. Again, that always applies a transformation. And that's the basic, simple use of this tool. And I'm just going to repeat it on a couple of the steps, just to kind of go through this. So I'm going to put these two objects in a folder. And again, if you click on one layer and hold shift and click on another layer, you can, anytime you hold shift and click on a layer, it will select those layers. And also if you hold, click on a layer and then hold shift and click on another layer, it will just select everything in between. So like if I select it, click on this layer, hold shift and select on spray, you see it selects everything in between. Just a reminder of that. But I'm going to grab these two layers, and Command G will put them in a folder. Command G for group. And you can name that, whatever you want. Thank you, bag. And that's that first part, that first warp. We're going to repeat this on the next step. So I'm going to hide this folder now and I have this pump bottle here. So I am going to grab this pump bottle label here, this hand soap label, Command C, Command V in here, hit OK for Smart Object, and again, just kind of size it up to something close to this front panel here, whatever size you want. It could be smaller, it could be slightly bigger, depend on how you want the warp to look. And you can see that's a pretty good size. I'm going to hit enter or return to apply my transformation, and then I'm going to do the same step that I did before. Now again, I'll just remind you, if I go to my transform tools and I try to click and drag a point or a side, it is going to be confined to those edges, only those edges moving. So if I click on it, then hold command, you can see it kind of keeps it confined into these like forced axes, basically. So that's not what I want. What I want is to be able to manipulate it, freely, like a free transform. So I will right click or control click on this, and again, convert to smart object. So now that is a nested smart object. Now, just to show you what that means, like if I double click on this smart object, basically it's going to be a pop-up window that has just this, graphics in it, and that vector smart object will be in here. And you can see this is .psb. That's the large document format for smart objects, for image smart objects. But now I have this other smart object, in this smart object. Smart object within a smart object. So if I double click on that, then it will launch me back to Illustrator, and I'll have these vector graphics maintained there non-destructively. So here you see I just have that, and you can see vector smart object. That was a new window that launched. I'm just going to close it because I don't actually want to change anything now. But just to remind you, anything you add into smart objects will reveal into the other smart object. So if I just added a new layer into this nested smart object, and I don't know, maybe just put like a dot on it just to show you. If I save this, again, it pops up in this smart object here, right? In the same way, if I go back to this and I launch that smart object again in Illustrator, if I change the colors of something, maybe this border, one of these border colors changes to red or something, and I save that, then you can see it change to red in here. But I don't really, need to do any of that stuff now, just showing you how the smart objects work. So I'm going to X out of this, and then I'm going to go into my history and just go back one step. So again, I have this as a nested smart object. And now, if I click and drag, you can see I can distort it freely. So let's do that. Again, Command T always launches your transform tools. And then I'm going to grab this top edge, and I'm going to try to match this edge first. And I think, these edges are pretty parallel, the sides of this bottle. So I think once I match that up, match those angles, it'll match kind of on both sides. But if it doesn't, I could always go in and modify it. So I'm going to click and hold this, and then hold down Command at the same time. And again, I'm just kind of trying to match that left edge. And actually, now that I'm doing that, I notice that maybe this edge is a little bit more warped, which is okay. I can get to that once I'm happy with the rest of it. But for now, I'm actually going to take this, and I'm going to try to get this top edge pretty close. So I'm going to click on this point, and then hold Command while still holding my click, and holding down Command. When I get it to a point I like, I'm going to release my mouse click. And again, this side isn't perfect, which is fine, because now once I go to match this bottom edge here, I'm going to do it from this corner, so I can kind of match this side edge a little more closely. So I'm going to hold down my click, and then hold down Command, move it around, and I'm going to match both the bottom and the right angles pretty closely now, and then let go of my mouse click, and then let go of Command button. And that looks pretty good for the angle, so I'm just going to hit return or enter, and that will apply the transformation. And you know, if you want, you can move the label up a little bit or nudge it however you think it should fit on the bottle. But that's, again, just kind of reviewing some of those distortions in the warp tools. It's always good to save, so you know, I'm going to save this now and just, you know, go ahead and save with your last name and, you know, week 6 or something like that. So now I have my thank you bag with that graphic on it and my pump bottle, and I'm just going to select these two, Command G group, and then put soap, or, you know, name it whatever you want to name it, and I'm going to hide that. Okay, now we are getting into a little funkier of a label shape. Is the all-purpose cleaner, but again, just kind of repeating the steps. And you know, these warps are becoming a little bit more distorted as we go along, and then once we get to this bottom one, we're gonna explore how to do like a warp around a cylinder, and how we can kind of create that arch going this way, and some other, you know, manual tricks we can do to get it to match if this top line and this bottom line aren't matching, or if we want to, you know, turn this circular label to a different angle maybe, and then warp it that way. But again, we're just gonna go kind of practice these warp tools again with this all-purpose cleaner label. So I'm going to copy that in, Command C, Command V. Again, I'm just clicking on my spray bottle here. Smart object, yes. And then I'm just going to, again, drag it to be a pretty good size, pretty close to what I want it to be in here. And then third time reminder, probably the last time I'm going to do this. You know, again, if I go to click and drag, it's confined right now because I haven't nested the smart object. So I'm going to hit enter to apply that. Control click or right click, convert to smart object, and now I have my, you know, object where I can warp it how I want it. So okay, let's continue. But basically I'm gonna just, you know, scoot this over, this edge over, so it kind of matches like the width of this surface here. And then I'm going to, and just to remember, Command T launches these controls, pretty standard. We've been doing it a lot. And then I'm gonna click here and hold Command while I'm holding my click, and then you can see I can move this around. And you know, it's free. It's a free transform, so you're kind of just like moving it around and trying to eye the angles that you want, and that's pretty good. And if I really want to kind of bring this in, this bottom corner in to kind of match the distortion that's happening on that, I can, you know, again, hold down click and Command, then move that corner around a little bit, and, you know, release my mouse click when I have it to a place I like it. And that's pretty good. So I'm going to hit return or enter. And now you can see I've kind of warped my label on here. And, you know, again, I tried to follow these bottom, you know, notches in the bottle. I can always Command T and launch my tools again if I want to, you know, maybe see that lip, or, you know, click and then hold Command to free warp any of these corners to match, and, you know, return and enter to apply always applies. So again, you could always, you know, the beauty of these tools is you can always relaunch them and tweak them and change the things to match how you want them to match. So that's pretty good. I'm gonna leave that there, and I'm gonna make a group out of that, select them both, Command G, and we'll name this spray. Can't spell today, sorry. And then we'll do one last one of these warps, which again, this is kind of a little bit more of a distortion than we dealt with the previous ones. But again, just kind of troubleshooting on how to, like, now this angle is like a lot more, you know, different rotation on it and everything. So just showing you how once you change the perspective of something, it's easy to warp those things. So disinfecting wipes, copy that, and I am going to paste this in. Smart object, yes. Make it a little bit bigger, and then hit return. Repeat the step, control or right click to make it a nested smart object, and then I'm going to Command T again to launch my transform tools. And you can see sometimes it helps, like when you're dealing with a surface, like if you're trying to fit something into like a surface behind it, you can actually take the even though the transform tools are live, you can drag the opacity down. Remember, any of these values, you can use these as a slider. Just click on this word, or just roll above this word. You see those arrows get added. So I'm kind of just putting the opacity down so I can see the shape that I'm trying to fit it in behind there. And now, because this one is on such a different angle, I'm actually going to rotate it first. And I'm going to rotate it just so this top part of this label matches, this part here. And then I'm actually going to take it down in size, so kind of like this corner and this corner are within this space here. So I'm just going to kind of, scale that down, decrease that way. I can do it a little bit more if I want this label to really fit in that space. And you can use your arrow keys to like nudge the whole thing, around however you want it to be. And then again, click, then hold Command. While both of them being held down, you can move this around and get it to match the angle that you like. And you can see most of the angles match now. The bottom one might need a little bit of nudging, and then this right angle over here on this top part here, I can modify that a little bit. So I'm just gonna use my arrow keys to nudge it over a little bit, and then that way when I move this, it's kind of the last piece to move. So I'm going to click, hold Command, and then manually just move it over and try to match this right side and this bottom. And again, that's pretty good. I can bring my opacity back up to 100, which I can do after I apply this change too. It doesn't really matter. But then I hit enter or return, and that will apply the change. And you can see, perfect, matching the angle. And I will group this, Command G, and name this wipes. And then we get on to the last one, which is introducing a different technique and a little bit trickier when you're getting into warping things onto cylinders. So we have our tin graphic here, and I'm going to start with the top. That's pretty simple. I'm just going to hit copy, Command C, Command V, Smart Object yes, and I will size this up so it's pretty big, closely matching like the width of how I want this sticker. And this one I don't actually have to warp because this is such a perfectly round angle here, and if I want to, I can just kind of squish it and it'll probably look pretty good up here. Again, use the arrow keys to move it to where we want it, and that's pretty good if I wanted to just get that. So that's pretty easy to do that kind of thing. But I actually want to mess around with the perspective of it a little, so I'm going to hit Command Z a couple times and just get it to go back to the circle here. And again, I matched the width of how wide I want it on the top here, but I'm just going to apply this because I am going to make it a nested smart object still, because there's some warps I want to do in here that I cannot do unless I do that. So I will hit return, right click or control click, convert to smart object. And now, after I do this initial warp, what I can do is I can take the corner here, click on it, hold Command, and whatever, I can free warp it, or if I hold down Shift and drag it out, and remember we did this in week 1, holding Shift confines it to these points, right? These 90 degree and 180 degree axes. But if I hold down Option, it will mirror that effect onto the other side. So you can see I am just giving it some perspective now, right? So you can see the type now is becoming, kind of this Star Wars, fading away from you kind of look. And, once I get that, I can shrink this down, and I can even just bring these sides in so the space around the sticker kind of matches. But again, you can see it has like a perspective on it now. And I'm going to hit OK and then just zoom in a little bit. You can see now that like the D isn't straight up and down now, and candle isn't straight up and down. It's kind of a forced perspective to kind of match what it would more realistically look like. So that's the top part again. So that's just introducing how to add some perspective to something like this. And even if that was a square top to a box, you can do that the same way to match the perspective. I'll show you real quickly. I'm just going to bring this in here just for the demo part of it. But let's say if I added this in here, again, I got to make it a nested smart object so I can get that perspective right. Those perspective tools to be live, converting it to smart object, Command T, holding Command while I'm clicking, and then Shift to keep it confined to these axes, and then Option to mirror it. And then, again, you can see how if this was a square top, I can keep that perspective. And, if it was like maybe a different angle even, I can kind of like always match a perspective of whatever angle the top is. All these points, when you have these perspective tools, as long as you click, then hold Command, you can move them freely while you're dragging your mouse around. Again, my click is still pressed down, and then when I get to a point I like, let go of the click, let go of Command. Same thing with the corners. Click, Command, both of them being held down, drag it to whatever you like, let go of the click, let go of Command, and then hit Enter or Return to apply your change. But I'm just going to delete that now. And we will move on to the last part, which is the most tricky. So I'm going to copy this side label part, and I'm going to move this layer down. Remember, Command and bracket left and right moves layers up and down. Command bracket right moves it up, you can see. Command bracket left, keep on doing that, moves it down. But I'm going to paste this side label here and, make it a decent size here. I'm going to try to keep this like kind of small so the height of it is like within the side of this cylinder here. And I am going to hit Return. I'm going to Control click or right click, convert it to nested smart object. And since I have two of these on this one, I'm just gonna name this side label. And remember, when you're naming things, if I click on one layer and go to name it, double click on it, it will launch this so I can name it. And if I just hit tab, it will automatically go down to the next layer and make that live so I can name that. And that would be top label. So I go to my side label, and the first thing I'm going to show you is, if this was a perfect cylinder and these curves match the bottom of this base and where the lid meets the rest of the structure, if those were perfect matching curves, you can just use the warp tools, arch warp tool here. So first I'm going to hit Command T because that will launch the transform. And then if I hold down Control and click or right click, I get this drop down menu, and warp is one of the options. So I'm going to click warp. And that gives me this free warp kind of, handles and everything here, which is ultimately what we're going to use. But before we get into that, I want to show you that up here at the top, there's options next to warp. And right now this is custom, but like I said, if it was perfect, we can use this arch warp. And, again, you have these values. I can drag this so that it's kind of, more closely matching. And again, if this is for phase one, this might be good enough. If you're just trying to get the effect of it and preview how it's going to look, you can probably just use this preset arch warp here, and I'm just putting a negative bend on it so it kind of goes under the curve rather than over it. If you put a positive bend on it, it will arch it upward. But so that's one thing I can do, and I'll just hit apply so you can see that's actually pretty good. But what I want to show you is how you can free warp this so that both of those curves match, and it's a little trickier, and it's a little less predictable. So you kind of have to figure out which is a better scenario for you, which is a better technique. But again, I'll try the free warp. I'll hit Command T and Controller right click and warp, and then again you can see these handles pop up, and basically you just have to kind of like eye these handles, and I'm kind of just doing it slow, basically just trying to match the curve on the bottom here. And you can see if I move this just up and down, it'll it keeps everything pretty centered, and like nothing is getting too distorted. But I can actually move it like to the left and right too, and then that kind of really starts distorting it. So just be careful that what you're doing is like you're kind of like keeping an eye on things and controlling it, because it is a very fussy kind of thing. So again, I'm just trying to be pretty precise with it. And the tricky thing about this is once I get the curves to match, it's going to look a little distorted, but we'll fix that in a second. But right now, all I'm trying to do is get these curves to match the curves of the lid and the curves of the base here. And that's pretty good. So now once I have it, you can see there's this weird distortion happening. That's because I'm only controlling this top edge and this bottom edge. Now what I can do is click in the middle here and then kind of drag it down, and you can see that evens things out a little bit. And this is coming back, and both of these bottom and top is less distorted. And I'm doing this at a weird screen resolution just so I can record this, so everything looks a little pixelated now. And also I'm keeping these files at 150 for this exercise, just so it's not like a huge file. When you're working in your own files, obviously if you're working 300 dpi, a lot of these graphics will be more crisp. So I apologize for that. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty good. So that's one thing, right? If I just hit, return, now this, like, the angles of these match a little bit better. And again, there's some weird distortion because of the resolution I'm doing this at. But even when you're doing this at a high resolution, there is like subtle distortions, but it's really hard to see that in like print or when you're showing these, presenting these at pretty high resolution. It'll kind of like how the 3D mapping stuff worked in Modo. You see these kind of segments, so the lower res it is and the smaller the object is, that kind of thing, you'll see more segments, and the higher res, the less you'll see. Same applies for Photoshop, except you can't really change the view of that. So it's, like I said, this is not as powerful as the tools in Modo, but it is great for when you're troubleshooting your graphics and presenting your phase 1 stuff, and you're just trying to figure out if a structure will even work for you. But anyway, I'm going to go back into this because I got these warps to match, and that's pretty good. But you can go in and if you want, you can kind of remember those handles that were here. When I pulled them to the side, I kind of stretched the graphics out. Well, you can do that so that it kind of matches the curve, because time you put a label on a curved surface, actually it's going to distort it so that the type in the center looks a little wider than the type on the edges. Because this label is kind of short and is mostly in the center, you don't really have to do it. If this was a longer label and was wrapping, you might want to do it just to kind of force it around the edge, and like any type that's over here would distort a little more realistically. But again, that's all kind of stuff that you're going to play with. But I'll show you, I'm just going to do a little demo of it for now. So Command T to relaunch it, and Control click or right click, and then I am gonna drag these handles, and you can see now I'm trying to drag them both so that they kind of like match, and these lines are staying straight, but you can see it kind of is warping that type to the left and right a little bit as I do this. And again, this is very subtle for this, so it really doesn't make a difference for this actual thing that we're doing, but you might have a label that wraps all the way around something, and that this is basically how you're gonna distort it more so that it kind of matches. And that's it for this. For the warp tools, hit return or enter to apply it, Command S to save, and that's basically how you can do some nice warps in Photoshop to just test your designs out on different structures and forms and things like that. And you'll get once you have your stuff worked out and you pick more complex structures, or you're working in Modo, then you can do some real mapping stuff that works a lot better. Actually, just now that I'm looking at this, these kind of sides are like going up and down, but the sides of this are like slightly kind of like tapered. So if I just hit Command T and just do that same thing I did with the top, where I'm kind of like click, then Command, then Shift, then Option, and then I can kind of distort this out a little bit, not too much, but again, just kind of make it a little more realistic. Very subtle. If I had Command Z, you could see it did very little. Just hitting Command Z and Command Shift C to kind of toggle between that change. Very subtle, but again, it's all up to you, the level of like detail you're trying to figure out. And these graphics are very simple, and these shapes are very simple, but this is how you can do these kind of warps. So that's it. Thank you.